And now the show that's on the phone warning the White House gardener to lay off the machete in the high grass. It's the variety show with your host, Rick Enloe. Yeah!
For 1 second and journey with me to a magical place and time called the 1990s. And this is the intro of a radio program that you could have tuned in on your AM dial, FM. One more time, let's hit that clip.
And now the show that's on the phone warning the White House gardener to lay off the machete in the high grass. It's the variety show with your host, Rick Enloe. Yeah!
Show. I feel like we gotta listen up. Can we give a round of applause to Rick Enloe, please? Come on. I don't know if we're gonna do this, but in the show, we kind of painted on this, but in the show, there's a beat where it goes, Rick, 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 Rick. You know how to love that? Rick. Guys, my name is Colin MacArthur. I'm a dear friend of the family, and I'm going to do my best to hold it together. But I'll tell you this. When you look out here, I can tell you that what I keep learning, and I'm going to touch back on that, is that the reach that Rick Enloe had is unbelievable. He was obviously a radio show host, and a pastor, and a father, and a husband. And then did you know he tried out for the Seattle Seahawks? This is the Louis L'Amour of like contemporary friends' dads from my perspective. But he was so much more than any of those things. And today is going to be difficult because we are not going to scratch the surface of who Rick is. And the reason I say is because for the last 6 weeks, I've been coming down, hanging out with the family, and in 6 weeks, I've learned so much more about what Rick was to my life than I ever even knew. So today, I'd like to welcome you not to an ending by any stretch of the imagination. I'd like to welcome you to the beginning of the journey of figuring out and finding out and enjoying what Rick Enloe has meant to your life. And I say that because it is profound and it's exploding everywhere in my life in real time. So, again, I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to kind of guide us on a journey where we try to memorialize an unmemorializable human being because he was larger than life. The first time I met Rick, I was Grant and I have been friends for 20 years, and I was going to drive Grant and myself to Malibu Club up in Canada. I'd never met Grant before. Our mutual friend Patrick Hillis said, "Hey, you're going to meet Rick. There's nobody in the world like this guy." We've all had times where somebody says, "Oh, you got to meet so-and-so. There's nobody like him." And it turns out there's only like 300 or 400 people like them in your zip code. So I'm waiting for them. Rick pulls up. He gets out. He starts to get out of the car, and I hear that he's talking. I was like, oh, he's having a conversation with Grant. But then Grant gets out of the car and is on his own doing his other thing. And I realized that Rick has started his conversation with me before he ever got out of his vehicle. And then for the next 15 minutes, an absolute fire hose is on me. And I remember leaving with Grant, and we didn't say anything for like 10, we had just met each other, and it's just dead silence for like 10 minutes. And Dan Grant says, "Yeah, that's my dad." I have to be real with you that it was I will never forget that, and I want that so desperately today. And so I'm real sad, and we can be sad, but I'm also so unbelievably honored that I got to call him a friend, and that I got to learn from him, and that I got to see the reach that he had. Where's Mr. Gill? Mr. Gill, are you with us? Mr. Gill is Rick's 5th and 6th grade teacher that made the trip here. If you like metaphor, there's a metaphor for you. That he impacted his 5th and 6th grade teacher enough to make him come all this way. And there's so many of us with so many stories. So it's going to be impossible today. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to hopefully laugh a lot. But I truly invite you to start learning about, or continue to learn what Rick meant to you. We won't scratch the surface, but we're going to have a lot of fun hearing about Rick. And so today, we're going to hear from a few dear friends of Rick's. We're going to have a chance to hear some songs. And in fact, because he was so prolific, we're also going to get a chance to hear from the man himself.
We have a dog and 2 cats. Now, cats, absolute cool. They do not have any loyalty, though. They're so cool that they're not loyal. I mean, our dog is so loyal to us, I come home from work and the dog goes nuts. You're home! And, just going crazy. There's skid marks on the ceiling and the dog is all over. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, you know very well that if you have a small dog and you come home from work, you don't want to hold that dog right away, Because, they express their loyalty, in very tangible ways. They get so excited. You come home and is a cat excited? I come home and I go, I'm home! The dog goes into a convulsion. The cats go, close the door. So what do you want, an award for coming home? And the cat yawns, and like, oh, gee. Feed me! That's the cat. The dog is like, no, you take the food. I don't need it. It's yours. The dog is so loyal.
Oh, my gosh. We're going to hear from some friends. With our first person coming up, we're going to have Gino Grunberg come up. And if you know Gino and Rick were co-pastors at HCC for nearly 30 years. College tennis partners, if you didn't know that. I didn't know that. And then Rick's joke, he is au revoir and I'm hee-haw. Ladies, help me welcome to the stage, Gino Grunberg.
Alrighty. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So good to be here. And of course, this is a great venue. This is really represents Rick and Marv. It's interesting. It's always been Rick and Marv, one complete sentence. It's awkward now not to say Rick and Marv, but that's the beauty of their relationship and, of course, their friendship with all of us. And, of course, this venue is perfect because it's all about food and friends. That's why they chose that. Great choice, great venue, and I'm so glad that you're here. Henry Ford once said that best friends are the people who bring out the best in you. And that certainly was Rick. He was the best friend who brought out the best in each one of us, wasn't he? And what's interesting about Rick is that he's an artist and was an artist, but what you don't know about him is he didn't know how to draw a straight line. Yeah, because he always drew circles. He drew circles of inclusion. When it comes to people and relationships, he never drew a line in the sand. He would always enlarge the circle, and you can see how large his circle is today, can't you, as you look around? Everyone was considered his best friend. If you were with him, he would give you his best. Now, of all the French people in the whole world, I was his favorite Frenchman. Rick and I met in college 48 years ago at a foosball table. There was a time in our history in this country that, of course, during college for us, that foosball was very popular, and we were in a small Bible college, and somehow in the budget they were able to buy one foosball table, which we found ourselves on that table, and we dominated. And as long as we kept winning, we never had to pay. And that is how our relationship began. From there, our friendship kept growing as we became tennis partners, and often he would say to the church, and we're still serving. We did mission trips together. We were ordained together and set aside for the ministry in the same time and the same service. And then 30 years ago, we had a dream to start a church, and we co-pastored that church for 30 years. And it's been a great adventure. I don't think pastors should have that great of a time and fun time as we've had in these 30 years. Often people would ask, how did you end up having such a great friendship? And the answer is really simple. We are polar opposites. I was raised, and I joined the Boy Scouts when I was young, and so we had this motto ingrained in our minds and hearts that became a motto that I've always lived by, and that is, be prepared. On the other hand, Rick's motto was be present. And he was, and he lived out every moment, and if you were with him, he would live out that moment and give you his best. And I remember on one particular occasion calling him saying, hey, Mardell and I are going to take a trip to France because that's where I'm originally from. English is my second language. When my mom remarried, somehow we migrated to the U.S., and I was 10 at that time, and I had to learn English, and somehow we lost contact with our family. So for 25 years, I had no contact with my dad or my brother. And then through a series of incredible events, got reconnected with my family. And so I said to Mardell, hey, let's go, and you got to meet my family, and let's go to Paris. So I called Rick, and I said, hey, Rick, Mardell and I are going to go to Paris next year. Why don't you and Marv join us? And he responded and said, well, that sounds like a great idea. I'd love to be there when you reunite with your family, but I'm not sure we can swing it. So I thought, okay, well, let's give it a try. So he hung up the phone, and when he tells the story, he says, and he prayed a little prayer. He says, God, wouldn't it be great for Marv and I to be in Paris when Mardell and Gino come off the train station and show up and welcome Gino and Mardell to Gino's homeland? So anyway, in the meantime, we are preparing to go on this trip. We're saving all the money we can save for 12 months. We're getting prepared. We're cutting the coupons, stop eating out. We did everything financially possible to get ready for this trip. About a month before we leave, I get a call from Rick at 11 at night. And he says, hey, what time of day and what day actually are you going to be landing in Paris? So I told him, and he responded saying, great, Marv and I will be there to welcome you. We're going to be at the Gare du Nord North train station, and we're going to welcome you. I go, you're kidding, what happened? He says, you won't believe this. He says, I took the boys to the Sonics game tonight. Remember the Sonics, professional team, world champions, okay? We used to have enough money in Seattle to afford a basketball team. And he says, went to the game, took the boys, I bought a program, and just because I wanted the boys to get interactive with the stats and the players and those kind of things. And then at halftime, the announcer says, ladies and gentlemen, pull out your programs and turn to page 27 of your program. If that program has an autographed signature of one of the players, please come and claim your prize. Rick turns to page 27, and lo and behold, Sonic's signature right there autographed. So he goes and takes the boys to the guest services, thinking he's going to pick up, a keychain or a hat for the boys, something like that. And the guy says, congratulations, here are your 2 free round-trip tickets to Paris, France. That's Rick. That's how they ended up in Paris. And we get off the train, and there's Rick and Marv welcoming us. And I had prepared, worked hard, starved ourselves to death. And all he did was, he was present. Rick and Marv's greatest treasures are people. I often said to Rick, Rick, you're a billionaire when it comes to relationships. I mean, just look around again. He was a loyal friend. He loved you. You loved him. He treasured Marv beautifully. Being around with Rick and Marv made all of our marriages better. He inspired us in how he cherished her, and how he honored her, and how he loved her. He treasured his boys, and their wives, of course, and their grandchildren, Pax, Kai, Blue, Goldie, Scotty. A few months ago, Rick read a letter to me that he had received from one of Matt's friends who attended Point Loma with Matt. Kevin is a close friend of Matt's, and through their relationship, Kevin got to know Rick. And Kevin today is a doctor and has 2 kids, and by the way, he scored perfect 1,600 on SAT test, so just imagine that. And I want to read you a couple lines because he captures something that's powerful in this letter. Kevin writes, I have found that many big shifts in my life can be traced back to small moments and encounters with extraordinary people. Isn't that a great line when you're talking about Rick? Then he goes on to say, he says, Matt and I became friends during a very challenging time of my life during my parents' divorce. He says, Rick, you were always kind to me, letting me tag along for family dinners and take us out to do fun things. I remember feeling so struck by how you interacted with your boys. At that time in my life, I could maybe count on one hand the number of times that my father had said, I love you, which showed how we lacked emotional depth in our relationship. He says, Rick, you were always open and loving with your boys, and I remember thinking and making a mental note, that's the kind of dad I want to be. And at the end of his letter, he says, I just wanted to thank you for being such a great example of what a loving father looks like. Rick loved his boys and his grandkids. When Rick got that letter, he took down from the wall his framed master's degree from the University of Washington, separated the glass, took out the diploma, put that letter in there. Because that's what he treasures. People. Rick really believed that every human being was a work of art created by a loving God. And that was reflected in what I like to call as one of his signature talks. Every pastor has a signature talk. And Rick's came out of the New Testament part of the Bible in the book of Ephesians. And these words gripped his heart years ago. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works so that no one can boast, for we are God's work of art. Created in Christ to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. And as an artist, that verse just captured his heart, and he made sure that everybody he met would come to an understanding that they were God's work of art, God's beautiful, precious creation. And then he would do this, and then he would say, the price of an art piece is never determined by the seller. It's always determined by the buyer. And he would tell us, the buyer, Jesus himself, crucified in our place for our sins, so that we could be reconciled to God, the Creator who loves us. And then on the third day, that deal was sealed by the resurrection. And then one day, we too will be resurrected, and we shall meet again. That was his signature talk. That was his message. That's his legacy. And today, we are all better people because Rick Enloe was our best friend. He was the best of friends. So thank you for celebrating that with us today.
I think early on, and this might have been easier for me because I wasn't raised, at a country club. I didn't go to an Ivy League school, all that kind of stuff. So I don't really know how difficult it would be for some people. But I think it's absolutely necessary to live with nothing to prove. And I think from the very beginning, like I've just decided, well, I got nothing to prove. I'm not trying to, prove to somebody that I'm worth something. I just decided, I like me. And so I think that, and then I think what kind of is the first cousin and nothing to prove is nothing to lose. And that's where I say, like, since I wasn't raised, with a lot of affluence, I was always pretty close to the curb. I would always think like, hey, you can have all this stuff, because really I didn't have much stuff. But I think it's a good way to keep, no matter what you have, you can have all kinds of stuff. But, you know how it is, Mont, like a lot of times, we have some close, maybe associates, or maybe even ourselves, maybe we've hit it big or whatever. And it's okay I always say to people, it's okay to own stuff as long as the stuff doesn't own you, and I think that's where you have to just say, hey, look, you always kind of have to get up in the morning and go, you can have all this stuff. It's fun. I like it. You should see how fast this Tesla goes. But at the same time, you can say like, yeah, but if I didn't have it, like, no, I'm not trying to prove anything with what I have, and I'm not trying to hold on to anything.
Well, if any of you know Rick, you know that he was a big fan of Van Morrison, but for some reason the family asked me to sing a Justin Bieber song tonight, so I hope you enjoy it. This is a great old Van Morrison song called Whenever God Shines a Light on Me.
Am I late? Am I late for the Bieber duet? Did I? Dang it. I wasn't going to tell stories, but there's just so many times when Rick would I mean, I was just thinking, like, we're listening to a song. HCC used to bring my wife and I up to do the entertainment for their family camp, and it was the greatest week of all of our lives. And we would go up to Malibu, and there were two things that I remember is that you would, at one point, you'd get to pie somebody in the face. You just had to come up to us and say, well, who do you want to pie in the face? And just every 8-year-old and younger just grab the microphone and say, so he's getting pied in the face 200 times in a night, right? Because every kid is just like, I want to pie Rick in the face. But so we had these characters that we're like looking for our lost bandmate, right? And so at the end of the week, we're going to bring up Gino and Rick as the lost, like, rock stars. And if you thought for a moment that Rick Enloe wasn't going to go full, like, method acting on his 2 minutes on stage, you're wrong. He gets on stage and is just this outrageous British rock star, and I go, where have you guys been? And he grabs the microphone and says, we're at a gig and a gig, man. And then it's followed for about the next 5 minutes. We're going to hear from another one of Rick's dear friends. This is Rick's college roommate, lifelong friend. They met in freshman year at Northwest University because they both had long hair, which we got to bring that back, Jim. I think it might be a good time. Also, Rick and I have this in common. We were both adjuncts at Northwest University, where Jim is now. Jim is a guest on Rick's radio show just for his contagious laugh. Help me welcome to the stage his dear friend, Jim Hugo.
Well, as Colin said, 50 years ago, this coming Monday, I looked it up in the archives, 50 years from this coming Monday, I was sitting in chapel at Northwest University for new student orientation, brand new freshman student. As Dean Clark, Orville Clark, the Dean of Students, announced that the next day, any guys with hair on their ears or over their collar were not going to be able to register. This was the 70s. Every red-blooded American guy had hair over his ears. I was more flexible then, but I could go like this and reach up and touch my hair. And so I'm looking around the room thinking, what has happened? I just got here and they're going to kick me out. And so I'm scanning the room and I look right across the aisle and there's a guy with hair just as long as mine. And I kind of pointed at him like this, like, he's talking about you. And this guy pointed back, no, he's talking about you. Walking out of the chapel after the service, I felt an arm come around my shoulders and a voice that would become one of the most important voices in my life said, why, you look like a young man with excessively long hair to me. We went to lunch and we talked it over and we decided that we would just take our chances. We'd go to registration and see what happened. The next day we learned that then, as now, Northwest University needed our tuition money more than it needed us to have a haircut. By winter quarter, we were roommates living in Gray Hall, room 410. May edification flow from 410. Many of us have read Rick's book, Low-Hanging Truth, which is available on Amazon. You know, there's a debate in literary circles as to the nature of memoir. Many literary critics would argue that memoir is actually a type of fiction, that changing or adding elements for the sake of a good story is part of the genre. Now, I was either present or a close observer of almost all the chapters in Rick's book, and I can tell you that Rick is definitely a follower of that school of thought. But even when he was adjusting details for effect, Rick always told the truth. In Low-Hanging Truth, the real Rick Enloe shines through. His kindness, his caretaking of the people around him, his winsome representation of Jesus, and his ability to fill the room with fun and make everybody there feel like he's your best friend, as Gino said. Rick is a natural includer. By the time we left Northwest and we're getting on in our lives in ministry, our circle of friends included 6 couples calling ourselves the UAA. UAA stands for Unofficial Alumni Association of Northwest University. And we committed to each other to live our life in relationship. For years, for a number of years, what that looked like was 12 adults and 13 children meeting up every summer for Camp UAA. One year, as the 25 of us were inner tubing down the Snoqualmie River, about half of us did not pay attention to what Uncle Dennis told us, that to stay to the right side of the river. When you saw the divide, go to the right side of the river. And so we floated into this cul-de-sac of rocks and brush on one side, this steep, muddy bank on the other side, and blocking our way to go forward, a tree had fallen across the path. And this was truly a scary situation. Water, you know how water goes with trees, it can suck you under, and there were about a dozen, 3 or 4 adults and a dozen, and the rest were kids in this spot. I came in and found kids like holding on to roots out of the mud bank to keep themselves from floating down. Many were on the edge of panic. When Rick floated in, he assessed the situation. He kind of positioned himself up next to this fallen tree. It was about 4 inches around, just right at the surface, dividing the water. And he looked at the crowd of fearful people and he said, "I can save you if you'll let me." Now, I was saying, "No, Rick, I don't think that. I think what we're going to do is work our way back upstream a little bit, climb out and walk around all this mess." And just as I'm saying that, a young 10-year-old Inga Leggett plunges into Rick's arm, leaving her inner tube behind. And I go, "Okay, I guess we are going to do that." Somehow we managed to get everyone in their tubes over the fallen tree, literally nearly drowning Gino in the process, only to find that we were now working our way through this maze of pilings. And there were nails and spikes coming out of what had been an old dock or something. And so we are like, individually, we're like pachinko balls, like spinning ourselves around to kick off of that piling and then spinning ourselves around to kick off the next one, going through this crazy, dangerous maze. That night at dinner, kind of traumatized over what was going on, we sat there and we rehearsed the day, and we were kind of laughing about Rick saying he could save us. And Rick said, "Well, I guess it was more of a temporal salvation." People's go-to descriptor of Rick is that Rick is funny. You know, do you know Rick Enloe? Oh yeah, he is so funny. To say Rick is funny is like saying a Lamborghini is fast. It is true, but it doesn't capture the whole. Rick was an artist, and humor was one of his media. Partly, I think it was because he was so easily bored and needed to keep himself entertained. I remember a few years ago, I called Rick up on it was a random Saturday morning. "Rick, how are you doing?" And he said, "I just came from a family conference at the hospital to talk about what next steps for my mom, who was in the hospital." And he told the story about how his mom, after this family conference, had grabbed this walker and was marching herself down the hallway of the hospital to prove that she didn't need to, she could live on her own. She was totally just fine. And then he said to me, He said to me, I think what really happened at the pool of Bethesda is that Jesus leaned down to the guy and said, we're thinking about assisted living for you. And afterwards I thought, that was hilarious. And that is just Rick entertaining himself. It's just what he was thinking about on a random Saturday morning. But beyond his own need for entertainment, Rick used humor to get past our defenses, to build relationship, to entertain, to make a point, and to communicate the truth from Scripture. Rick was not just a funny preacher. Rick was a profound preacher who used humor to make his point and to really touch the lives of thousands of people. Excuse me. Oh, somebody's water is here. Excuse me, I'm getting a dry mouth. Hold on. I'm an old man. Okay, there we go. I could tell so many stories, and I had to cut like 3 or 4 really good ones for sake of time. But I do want to mention 2 more things. One is Rick's pastoral counseling style was not typical. His counseling was more along the lines of, I can save you if you let me. And often what he did was assess your situation and tell you what to do. And this would look like a nudge on the forearm. You know, he'd kind of nudge you like this and poke you. And if you've been there, you can feel this. And he'd say, you know what you should do? And the truth is, much of the time, he was absolutely right. And the second point I want to make is just how much he loved Marv and his family. I remember I was there when Rick and Marv, I'm not going to look at Marv, but I was there when Rick and Marv started going out, and the joy that he had when he was going out with her at 18 years old was still there at 68. And he loved Marv, he loved his boys at every stage of life. He thought Matt and Grant hung the moon, and he so loved being a grandpa. And I can tell you how much of his conversation was all about you guys. It was, he delighted in you guys. At UAA gatherings over the years, we would talk about the day when the first of us would someday pass away and go on to be with Jesus. And in our minds, of course, we were young, and that was way off in the future, and it was never going to happen. But even then, we knew it was going to be really hard. But we had no idea. And my consolation comes from 1 Corinthians 15, and that reminds us that as much as this hurts, and as much as we miss him, death does not have the final say. And this is a painful reality of our fallen world. It separates us for a time, but we are going to be together with Rick again.
Now, my family, my dad was an incredible disciplinarian. My dad had this little technique he would use. He would discipline us. Now, don't tell my dad that you're not supposed to spank children. You tell him that, he'll spank you. I mean, he seriously believes in his form of discipline. And my dad's technique was a little different than just spanking you, but he would never spank you at the point the incident occurred. He would come home and go, you did that? You knew that was wrong. Okay, you're going to get a spanking at 8 o'clock tonight. And I'd go, 8 o'clock? That's 6 hours. And I'm telling you, the 6 hours was worse than the spanking. I mean, I'm on death row for 6 hours, trying to get a call into the governor, anything, you know? I'm thinking. And 3 hours into it, you know what you do every time? You think, wait a minute, calm down. Maybe he'll forget. And then you think, maybe I can help him forget. Maybe I can be the perfect kid for the next 3 hours, and that will sort of cover all of my transgressions. And so you go in and you go, hello, Dad, you're sure looking great today. How's the oxygen in the room? Is it warm enough? Okay, you want a drink of water? Here's a newspaper. Here's your slippers, Dad. Okay, I'm going to go help Mother with dinner. Mother! You know, and then you go in there. And you're trying to be the perfect children. Can I help you with your homework? And you're being this ultimate kid. And for the next 3 hours, you're the model child. And then 8 o'clock rolls around. You sit there and you think, it's 8 o'clock and he forgot. 8:01 and he forgot. 8:02 and he's looking at me.
Grant was also an adjunct at Northwestern University, so we'll negotiate contract later on probably what we lost. It's my sincere honor to bring up our next speaker. Matt Enloe introduced Rick and Dave through the Leadership Foundation work. Rick co-hosted a podcast with Dave Hillis, who's going to come up and speak. Grant and Patrick played for the mighty Northwest Eagles together, and it is my distinct honor to welcome to the stage Dave Hillis. Come on up.
I think I want to ask your forgiveness here on the front end. I'm not quite sure I'm going to get through when Grant and Matt texted me and said, hey, would you do this? My first response was, of course not. Then I talked to Patrick and Ryan a bit about it, and they slowly kind of coaxed me off the ledge, and so it's an honor to be here to speak. The poet Cervantes said, "He who lives well preaches well," and that's all the divinity I can understand. He who lives well preaches well. And that's all the divinity I can understand. So what I'd like to do is reflect a little bit on how Rick lived well and helped me better understand divinity. But I want to give you some context, because Rick's and my relationship wasn't love at first sight. I would describe us as kind of amicable agnostics with each other. I mean, we were in two different worlds. Rick's out in the suburbs, I'm in the city. Rick walks into a room looking for people. I walk out of rooms hiding from people. On a Friday night, Rick is your go-to. I'm a buzzkill. And so in many ways, there was not room for Rick and I. But what made it even a bit more egregious is we had these things called boys that played basketball that were highly competitive. And so there were long periods of time where we would show up in the same basketball court, and of course, Christian, trying to be loving, and hoping that our son killed the other son. And so it was in that context that Rick and I kind of ambled around each other a little bit. Would nod, of course. We were both kind of professional Christians at some level, but that was about it. Two things changed that reality completely. The first is that, as was said, Grant and Patrick became roommates and college basketball players together at Northwest. So now, for the first time in the history of our basketball careers together, we could actually choose and root for the same team. That was kind of fun. And the second was that Matt came to work for me at the Northwest Leadership Foundation. And that also was life-altering. So 3 reflections on Rick. And the first is what I would call Rick the Courageous. So one of the things that we used to do at the Northwest Leadership Foundation is every Monday morning, like clockwork, we would have a 2-hour theological reflection time. And the idea, of course, was trying to make sure that in the midst of all of our activity, you know why you're being active. And so I was asked to lead that, and I was doing some things on people like Renee Girard and James Allison. And so one particular Monday morning, I show up, and I'm kind of getting my papers ready. It's about 5 minutes till, and all of a sudden there's Rick. And I kind of look at Rick, and Rick kind of looks at me, and what's happening here, Rick? He said, well, he says, I hope this is okay, but some things have been going on with Matt. I kind of like it. I like where it's headed. And I think it has something to do with these Monday mornings. Would you mind if I sit in? So for the next 2.5 months, roughly, Rick Enloe would show up, take out his little notebook, and take notes. The courage of a father to look at another who's having influence on your son is huge. I mean, I know what I would have done. I would have rivaled. I would have tried to figure out how to diminish Rick Enloe if he was having influence on my son. I would feel threatened. But the courage of Rick Enloe, opening himself up, I'm going to take notes. Let's do this thing. It was great. One of the things that I most admired about Rick, there wasn't even a whisper, a hint of rivalry in him. And me being one that kind of lives most of my life in that space, it changed me forever. Well, at the end of that 2.5 months, classic Rick Enloe, he comes up and he says, hey, I've got some good news. Well, great. He says, yeah, he says, HCC has seconded me 1 day a month to leadership foundations. Rick, did I ask for that? No, but I just think we can do some stuff together. So he says, I'm going to come down once a month, and we'll kind of figure this out. And this is where I would describe Rick, not just the courageous, but the contagious. He shows up, and he says, I think we should do a podcast. And I mean, people know me technologically. I still don't know what a pod or a cast is and how do you bring them together. And he said, what we'll do is we'll just get a mic going and we'll just kind of go back and forth. And I said, Rick, I don't do back and forth. I mean, I need a script. I need bullet points. I need something. He says, no, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. So for the better part of 8 years, every month, Rick Enloe and Dave Hillis did the Citius Playground podcast. Now, one of the things about that podcast is, at least the way it was framed, was Rick was kind of the interlocutor, right? He would tell jokes and stories, and I was, quote unquote, the theologian. I was going to be the one that kind of said something profound. But I remember early on going, Rick is formidable in his own right theologically. And I remember the moment when I experienced that. We had a staff retreat down at Mount Angel Benedictine Abbey. And I asked Rick and Gino to come down with us, and asked Rick to be one of the people that would do a devotion. And so if you've ever been to a Benedictine Abbey, it's got its own kind of vibe to it. And so I'm sitting there with Rick at breakfast in the morning. I go, hey, you ready for the devotion? He says, yeah. He says, I think it's going to be a good one. And I said, that's good. Confidence is good. And I said, what are you going to do it on? He goes, don't be a dickie. I said, don't be a dickie? He says, yeah. He says, I've kind of been working on this thing. And so, those fake kind of turtlenecks that you wear? It's going to be this whole thing about trying to be real and authentic. And I'm going, still stuck on don't be a dickie. So we sit down for our staff time, and Rick proceeds to do a devotion on don't be a dickie. And it was one of the profoundest, holiest, funniest moments I've ever experienced. I wanted to read a piece of Don't Be a Dickie. So, of course, as Jim said in his book, Low Hanging Truth, there's a chapter or a passage, Don't Be a Dickie. And at the end, he gets to lessons learned. So what's the low-hanging lesson? What's the turtleneck takeaway? Isn't that a great phrase? What's the turtleneck takeaway? You can write for a long time and not come up with something that good. Be the real deal. Resist the urge to pretend. Let's not end up style rich and substance poor. Keep it real. Ralph Waldo Emerson summed it up when he wrote, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." And this is classic Rick. Thanks, Ralph. That's eloquent longhand for don't be a dickie. I mean, all you can do is salute that kind of theological talent and someone's ability to look at a mock turtleneck and say something profound. Which really leads to the third reflection about Rick. Because you can't look at a dickie and figure out a theological truth if you're not a bit complicated. And so along with Rick the courageous, Rick the contagious, there was Rick the complicated. In July of last year, I invited him over for a cigar and lunch, and he let me know the news of his diagnosis. I was completely gutted. I think he saw that I was. And then Rick, in his wonderful way, said, "Well, there was some good news here." And I go, "Really? What is it?" He goes, "Well, I can start smoking again." The classic. So we began what I would describe as a text chain that went on for the next year up until 3 days before he died. But the text chain took on a different flavor because a month later, I had to let him know that my youngest son had died. It's hard to overstate, as I tried to stay afloat, what texting with Rick meant. I mean, here he is, stage 4, and he's ministering to me, giving me little pep talks over the text. Here was Rick's superpower. I mean, he was the ultimate performer, right? Performative at times that you just kind of made your head scratch. But it was because it was slathered in pathos. Rick got pain. He understood it. He understood gray spaces. He understood that this world rarely offers itself up in black and white ways. And so for me, as much as I appreciated the courageousness of Rick and the contagion of Rick, it was that complexity of Rick that ultimately demonstrated this divinity that Cervantes talked about. I'll end by saying that one of the things that Rick would do is he says, I don't know about your prayer life. I mean, you think it's got any gas to it? And I said, most of the time not, right? I'm looking at a lot of things that I've prayed for that appeared to have gone nowhere. And so Rick would say, well, do you have a favorite prayer then, when you feel like you're not going anywhere? And I said, yeah, Rick, I actually do. And he says, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's something that Meister Eckhart said. And Rick, being Rick, always eager, always curious, what did he say? He said, if the only prayer you can ever utter is thanks, that would be enough. And in classic Rick fashion, he looked at me and said, that's a keeper. So, to the Enloe family, to the HCC community, thanks.
As we've been preparing for this, there are so many things that I can say about my uncle. He was a wonderful man, but the one thing that I really wanted to stand in front of all of you and say is that Rick was an encourager. That is one of his characteristics that through his passing, I've personally have realized I haven't been a very encouraging person lately. So I just wanted to encourage all of you today. Just there's someone on your mind that you know needs encouragement, and Rick would be stoked if you did that. I'm going to play a song for you guys, and it was one of Rick's favorite songs. It's called His Eye is on the Sparrow. And, we were just talking about how Rick wanted people to be real and authentic and stuff, so I'm going to be real and authentic with you guys. I had never heard this song before, but Aunt Marv was like, you have to sing this song, and so I was like, okay, yeah, it was probably a hymn, whatever, it's going to be like super easy, and it's not. The song is most famously sung by Whitney Houston, and if you know anything about me, I actually learned how to sing with a leaf blower on my back, singing to Guns N' Roses live. So Whitney and Axl, they're a little different, but then to top it off, I'm like, how am I gonna sing this song? Then Aunt Marv sent me like 3 videos of this guy like shredding an acoustic guitar, and she's like, so can you sing and like do this crazy shredding on the guitar while singing at the same time? Yes, I will do my best. So yeah, man, this song over the last few weeks has it's kind of blown my mind because it's hit me right where I'm at, and I thank the Lord for that. And yeah, here it goes. Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? And why should my heart be lonely? Alone for heaven and my
His eye is on the spot, and I know he watches me. His eye is on the spot, and I know he watches over me. And I know he watches. Yes, I know he watches. Yes, I know he watches over me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pax Enloe. I'm very lucky to say that I'm Rick's oldest grandchild. Although I only got to spend 13 years with Rick, who has grandkids called Grampy, he influenced me in many ways. I'm up here speaking about him today, not because I feel comfortable doing stuff like this. I'm doing it because I want to carry on his legacy. He spoke in front of people like this every week, so I believe talking about him in front of all of you is a small thing I could do for him. And it makes me smile thinking of how proud he would be to see me do something hard, even if I mess up words or cry. Grampy has 5 grandkids who he calls his grands. Kai, who is 11, Blue, who is 10, Scotland, who is 8, and Goldie, who is 5, and me at 13. It's so cool for us to say that Grampy was in our lives all the time. Grampy showed us how to live our life through generosity and loving other people. He always paid attention to those who needed help, and he was a fan of everyone, especially us. We know he thought we were awesome, and he celebrated who God made us to be. As far as being a grandpa to us 5 grandkids, we all agree he was the best. There are many favorite things about Grampy, and even more memories we love, but here are a few of our favorites. Sleepovers at Grandma and Grampy's were epic. There were so many layers to sleepovers. First, we always started with the activity. The activities were unique. They couldn't be just basketball or bowling. There had to be a twist to them. One time, I remember he got us a new BB gun. Our targets were water balloons that he put at the end of the alley between his garage and the woods. That day, we had so much fun. And the trophy for hitting the most water balloons was a Jesus bobblehead. Grampy kept it out there the whole time because he said Jesus was there watching over us, keeping us safe. And the food at the sleepover, homemade pizza, which we always help make, and the best pancakes in the morning, which we called Grampy Cakes. But my favorite was the bedtime song that was really a story he made up. He would strum his guitar while putting everything we did throughout the day in a song. A couple of my favorites, Zipper Got Shocked, Dissecting a Frog, and a couple other stories that I probably wouldn't be able to say in public. We would always go to bed laughing our heads off. Grampy showed up for us. He came to all the things that mattered to us. Sports games, dance performances, piano recitals. He was always in the audience and on the sidelines. But that's not what makes him unique. How many people can say they received notes of encouragement from their grandpa after every event? We call these Grampy notes, and we have stacks of them. These notes were written or sometimes even sketched on random pieces of paper, receipts, or napkins. But they marked the positive things we did, whether it was a good shot, a great pass, hitting the right move, and, most importantly, highlighted anything we did that showed good character. High-fiving a teammate, picking up an opponent, or keeping our head up when things didn't go our way. Grampy made sure he noted all of this for us to read after every event. He told us he was proud of us and loved us no matter the outcome of anything we ever did. Man, I'm going to miss him. My brother Kai would like me to read something he wrote on his behalf. It is impossible to put into words how much Grampy did for us. He was always interested in whatever we were doing and loved having a conversation about any topic. Sometimes he would even study or read a book just so he could talk about the things we liked. It made me feel very loved and important to him. He was also the best at surprising us with treats. I'm homeschooled, and I always loved when he would randomly drop by with a milkshake or a smoothie, reminding me to be nice to my teacher. He loved and encouraged us in all our ideas, and I really felt like he believed we could accomplish our dreams. I miss him, but will remember all the times he spent with me. Grampy, your 5 grands love you. Thank you for the time you spent investing in us, encouraging us, and loving us. We hope to make you proud as we grow up and do our best to carry on your legacy of loving people the way you loved us.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm not a professional speaker. This is not my usual, but I have a dear friend named Marvy who asked me to share this letter. And I would like you to hear the words that she wrote, and I want you to see them through her lens as she was married to Rick. So here it goes. Is he that funny at home? Did that really happen? How do you live with him? Is it just a laugh a minute? These are questions that I was asked after every comedy show or Sunday talk that Rick delivered. Rick was the most incredible partner I could ever have hoped for. He was perfect for me, and we became a great team. God blessed us with each other. We knew it, and we traveled around the world and had so much fun. I was the realist, and he was the optimist. It's better this way, he would often say. When we would miss a flight, his thinking was, maybe we'll meet someone new on the next flight. He always looked at the glass as not half full, but full and overflowing. It was this attitude that was so contagious. He was also very persuasive. When we lost both our jobs while our kids were in elementary and middle school, he said once again, it's better this way. He proceeded to convince me that 12 consecutive years in school was way too long. They need a sabbatical year, he said. So we sold everything we owned and took our boys and hopped on a plane to the Netherlands for the adventure of a lifetime. Rick was incredibly generous. He loved to give of his time and talents to anyone he met. He spent most of his energy investing in relationships, and as you can see by looking in the room, like everyone said, it has paid off in amazing lifelong friendships. He was an includer. You're hearing common themes, I know. He always looked for ways to expand his circle. He hated the phrase, "Tick-tock, the game is locked and no one else can play." Growing up as a child, he had moved around to different states and needed to fit into school quickly. Learning to make friends came easily to Rick, and it quickly became a game he loved to play, using his self-deprecating humor to make others laugh. He knew how it felt to be the new kid and always looked for ways to include others. He was an encourager. Helping others to succeed was one of his highest goals. He did whatever he could to inspire and encourage all those around him. He was extremely generous and kind, whether it was making a gourmet meal, painting an artistic card, or a visit to the hospital, or heating up Marvelise ketchup. Okay, I just threw that in, but he used to do that. Yes, what in the world? He always served with love. Everyone thought he was their best friend. We met in 1974 when we were 18 years old and freshmen at Northwest University in Kirkland, Washington. We were both PKs. Rick was from St. John, and I was from South Seattle. I heard that one of my classmates was getting a ride to Spokane for the weekend from a guy she sat by in class. He was charging $15, and he knew my sister lived in Spokane. "Do you think he could take one more?" I said. That is how I first met Rick. He drove to the front of our dorm in his gunmetal gray 56 Chevy. Rick and his friend, Jim Hugel, jumped out of the Chevy, introduced themselves, both with shoulder-length hair, bleached jeans, big headphones on, and sugar daddies hanging out of their mouth. "Hi, I'm Rick, and this is my friend Jim." The trajectory of my life would shift from that moment on, and it would never be the same. I had never met anyone who was that hilarious and at the same time so intelligent. The first time he asked me out, he saw me at the bank and waited for me outside. We talked for a few moments, and he then invited me to a Sonics game for that night. He said he had 2 tickets and wondered if I wanted to go. I was thinking, this isn't a date, he just needs to get rid of the tickets. I found out 6 months later that he didn't even have tickets, but that someone in his dorm was selling Sonics tickets. When he returned to the dorm, the tickets had just been sold. Instead of telling me, he showed up at my dorm, picked me up without a word, and proceeded confidently to the game. When we arrived at the Coliseum, he said, "Just wait here." He disappeared around the corner. He came back shortly with 2 tickets. "Ready to see the Sonics?" I wouldn't find out till months later that he bought scalp tickets and paid way more than they were worth. How could you not love this guy? And I did. When we were dating for several months, he said, "You might find someone to love you, but you will never find someone that will love you as much as I will." And he was right. He loved me very well, but he loved all of us well. Our boys, grandkids, parents, family, and friends. He always had a way of making us feel incredibly loved and seen. It has been an amazing life journey for the past 50 years. God blessed us with 2 amazing sons who married wonderful women and have given us 5 world-changing grands, Pax, Kai, Blue, Scotland, and Goldie. He loved us all so uniquely and lavishly. We never doubted his complete love for all of us, and we knew he always had our best interests at heart. Since he was diagnosed a year ago, he became so intentional with his time, taking advantage of every moment we had together. He always told me that he loved his life and wouldn't change a thing. Because of who he was and his ability to motivate people in ministry, he was able to travel around the world and meet such interesting people. He spoke about the love of God to many different audiences. A final word to Rick from Marv. Thank you for taking me with you, Rick. It was my honor to walk with you and hold your hand in great times and hard times, even as you walked into heaven. No regrets or words unsaid. We all knew exactly how much you loved us because you said it often. I will always continue to take you with me going forward and forever hold you in my heart. I love you, Ricky Dean, and thank you for the ride. Turns out it was the best $15 I ever spent, and I have loved every single moment. Again, thanks for the ride. Love you.
I think what I have always had, I guess I would consider this like sort of a gift. I don't think I really develop. Well, I mean, I try to develop it, but I think I just got it. And that is that I always see so much potential in other people. Like I always believe I have plans for other people that they don't have for themselves. And sometimes that's been disappointing because, I've said like, man, I think you could do, and then people go like, yeah, nah. And I think, oh, too bad. But I think that's what I really have a deep down belief, like, man, you would be awesome, and so I'm kind of I guess like an unofficial cheerleader. I suppose some people are thinking like, hey, I didn't really invite you to, believe in me. So like, go away. But anyway, and I think through all of my former stuff, there's two little threads that kind of, run through there. And one of them is relationships. I love friends, I love making friends and keeping friends and, like, just like you and I mean, like, I think I have and I think both of us have a pretty amazing collection of friends that are like, long-term friendships. And of course, now there's all kinds of studies that indicate that's, really helpful for, all kinds of emotional and, every kind of health. So, and then the second thing is that I'm always been, and again, you and I think we share this, able to communicate, something I'm thinking, so there's a lot of people that have great thoughts, but they're not maybe, they can't quite connect, what they're trying to say or, so I've been a student of that.
I started by saying, sorry, that I was introduced to Rick as somebody I would meet nobody like in my life. And that held true. Thanks for being here. The party isn't over. On behalf of the Enloe family, I wanted to acknowledge those individuals who generously contributed their resources to help this Rick-style celebration. You know who you are, and thank you so much. And with that in mind, this Rick-style celebration continues. We have the bar, we have food, and Rick would love if you shared stories and just, like he said, loved each other. So we're here for a while. Please continue to enjoy the space and the time and the friendship. Thank you for what you meant to Rick, and let's continue learning about what he meant to us. Thank you so much.